The slides for today are in the Fellows folder. Jenny, would you mind also putting a link in the chat box just in case anyone hasn't had time to get there? So our agenda this morning, we're going to keep talking about constructive alignment and learning activities. So our focus today is to continue to think about that alignment and to continue to create, to refine the learning activities you have and to create additional ones. And then in the afternoon, then we will, of course, meet in our content groups to discuss and give feedback on those learning activities you work on today. Also this morning, we're going to introduce what we call the Hydrolearn module feedback tool. And this is essentially a checklist along with a place for feedback and comments related to the different aspects that we'll be looking at when we review your modules. Everything on this feedback tool should look familiar because, well, literally we've copied and pasted some of the items right onto our slides as we've talked. So it should not feel super new or different, and you should, so hopefully that will feel comfortable. So our goals are for you to continue designing learning activities that align with your learning objectives and the instructional content you plan. I've heard some groups talking about how it feels a little bit odd to be creating your kind of final learning activity, so I've started there. But as people kind of talk through it, they also seem to have noticed a benefit because for some people that's changed the outline that you came up with for your course. And so in that way, we're thinking, if we think with the end in mind, what we want to design, what we want students to be able to accomplish, then we can kind of think backwards to ensure the instructional content will get them there. And you'll also use the module feedback tool to self-assess and revise and refine your learning objectives and learning activities that you've created so far. So that'll be something you'll work on during your partner time. So for our check-in today, I am trying out a new pedagogical tool, so so bear with me, but I think this should be fun. So if you had unlimited funds and COVID-19 were not an issue, and you could just drop everything tomorrow and go for a one-week vacation, where in the world would you go? So using that link at the top of the page, which I don't think is a live link, I think you have to type it in to your window. Where would you go for a one-week vacation? Oh, is that Morocco? Hawaii, Madagascar? You guys have diverse tastes.
Nobody's going anywhere in the US. Somebody's got to click on Logan, Utah. There we go.
Dave, was that you?
Yeah.
Are you falsely skewing the results?
Well,
a bunch in Europe. Yeah, the COVID-19 would have to not be an issue, as I've heard many European countries are issuing bans on travelers from the US because of our high rate of cases.
all right.
Spot in Michigan, or that's in.
You would go to Michigan?
No, I saw one pin in Michigan.
That's me. This is I like to camp on the Sleeping Bear Lake National Park. I've been doing that for a while.
That's nice. I'm in Ann Arbor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Any
So
other
David,
questions about people's pins they've dropped?
David Spellman wants to go to Europa, which is one of the moons of one of the planets.
David Spellman's always testing the boundaries, isn't he? Very cool, David.
So
Neat.
which planet is that a moon of? Is it Jupiter or? we can learn a bit about our solar system.
I don't know. Does anybody know what? Oh, Jupiter. There it
Jupiter,
goes.
okay.
Thanks. Very cool. Well, lots of cool places. I even see somebody on Antarctica. Very neat. So when you take your breaks today during our partner work time, you might have some time to visualize yourself in your preferred location. David Spellman, you can imagine yourself in a spacesuit in your preferred location.
You could go there even with COVID, because the spacesuit would keep you safe.
That's true. And there's probably not a high rate of transmission over there. All right, so Imad is gonna kind of share with us his thoughts on revisiting the ideas of a rubric.
Okay, well, good morning. I guess when it comes to rubrics, I see here Melissa put 2 bullets here. So the idea of, let me see if I actually am educated enough on these 2 bullets. So to set very clear expectations for students, that is very much true. And to simplify grading for instructors with the goal of making grading more objective. That is true too. And whenever somebody wants to use your module, the first thing that they will think of is, how can I grade this? So if you already have something that can help them, that will actually facilitate their work and make your module more adaptable. I know some of you, I mean, I think all of us want to see that others want to use our own modules and get more citations or get more famous, So this is something that other adapters really look for. And I think, like Melissa explained, over the last few days, also writing these rubrics help us, meaning help the author of the activity ensure that they close the loop between the learning objectives and learning activity, and whether they actually whether the activity is delivering the objectives that we had in mind when we designed the module. It's also helpful for us for the authors who write the modules to make sure that they can actually address the goals there. So yeah, so I guess when I first wrote some of these rubrics, or some of the earlier modules that we worked on, I did not follow the same design that we are trying to do in this workshop, simply because I was not really yet, trained in this mindset, or at least we didn't think through it fully. So I would develop maybe the learning objectives because, okay, it makes sense to me. And then I would write the content, spend a lot of time writing the content. And then, okay, maybe some of the learning activities. And I was told we need to have rubrics. So I would go back and write rubrics. And when I used those things in the class, okay, things work fine, as far as the activities and the learning content. But when I sat down to grade, I said, well, I wrote rubrics, so let me reuse the rubrics to see if I can actually grade this thing. And that's when it failed, actually. I found that, the rubrics I wrote are not helping the students, actually, because sometimes the questions I asked are not specific enough, or maybe they are not designed with that rubric in mind, or at least I did not check the rubric against my own questions. So that's when we tried to come up with that table where you actually lay down the rubric and try to link it to your learning objective, and make sure that you have a criteria that you look at. And things got a little better, not a whole lot better, but a little better. And it's just an improvement process, iterative process. So, and Jenny can share some of her experience with me here when we sat together. Laura also, from some of our students, we sat together to look at the rubrics and grade the submissions. And what we did is I'm going to share the screen here in a minute. Can I do that, Melissa? Or you're sharing this, right? Okay. So, I'm not suggesting you do that, part of this workshop or maybe ever, I don't know. But anyways, we what we laid out here, I said, okay, I'm going to take one learning activity or one section. So this was one section from our one of the modules, and I basically this is the activity, learning activity 3.3. It deals with developing precipitation depth, duration, and frequency information. And I laid down the criteria that I had in the rubric, right? So I'm going to look at this. That's what I wrote in the rubric. And then I looked at what the students need to submit for me to grade, summary question, a table, a figure, a discussion, what have you. And then, I basically, I was grading it, so it was helping me with grading as well. And then I would try to score every student according to their deliverable here, using the rubrics that I wrote earlier. And you would notice that I also tie it to learning objective, which learning objective I was trying to, or I thought that this activity or that part of the activity is addressing. And went through that exercise. This is the students' names. Of course, you don't see them here. It's just the initials. And like I said, the first time, when I did this, it helps me to see, are the students really, how are they performing on the different activities, and how are they, I'm tying them back to the learning objective, basically. So you can do some summary statistics here to see, are they really learning that particular learning objective? And the rubrics that I have there are specific enough for me and them. Maybe I need to go. We went back and forth several times to actually revise the questions we had in the learning activity, according to the rubrics, or maybe revise the rubrics to be consistent with the learning activity. And I think many of you actually discovered that yesterday, on your own, which is really great, because, we developed, or Melissa developed this approach, with that basic problem in mind. How do we really make the rubrics and the learning activities and the learning objectives all tied together? So I'm glad that you guys are converging into that, because it becomes very helpful to you and the student. Like I said, we can, sometimes also I found by going through this exercise that maybe my questions were too simple sometimes, that I cannot really judge whether they achieved that learning objective. Maybe I was too ambitious in setting out the objectives, or maybe the questions were not clear enough, because now I'm looking at what they submit and what I wanted to see, to find out that really what I asked off of them was not clear enough, maybe. So it just helps improve the entire triangle of this constructive alignment. That's how I see it. You can do some simple statistics on average and stuff, for every learning objective, and see where they are doing, with every learning objective. Something also I was curious about, I said, okay, well, we teach them through Hydrolearn or through these modules, active learning and problem-based learning and all that stuff. And they basically do it as part of the class or on their own. Now, did they really learn it? So in the exam, I would go back to my final exam or midterm, and I would try to track down which part of the exam, maybe which question in the exam that's related to this activity. And I would get their grade from the exam on that. And I was curious, if they did so good in the Hydrolearn, did they do as well on the exam? And it becomes a little messy, but because when I wrote the exam, I did not also have Hydrolearn in mind, right? So that was another missing connection, because sometimes I just use an old exam and I want to modify it. I don't have time to write a new exam that is in accordance with what they really learned in the class. I admit that. So it helps you kind of tight the entire course, actually, starting from, and it also points out, if they do really bad on the exam in specific problem that they learned in Hydrolearn, maybe we didn't do a good job in how they learned in Hydrolearn, or maybe they did. So it kind of, gives you an independent feedback, so to speak, for the activities. This is an example that Melissa actually plotted this data showing how they did on one specific topic in Hydrolearn and how they did it on the exam. Related concepts, and you can see some correlation here. maybe the exam was a little too easy. Many of them in the exam got a perfect score that they did not do that well. This is a student by student. So, but overall, there's some correlation. Another example, I don't know if I have it here or not, but that it's the other way around, where many did. So I don't see the graph here. Many did so good on the Hydrolearn. Yes, this one here, right? A lot of them did really good on Hydrolearn, but the same concept in the exam, they kind of did not perform well. So maybe they worked together and figured it out, and now when they came to the exam, they had to do on their own and they forgot. Or maybe the question in Hydrolearn was too simple, or maybe the question in the exam was too hard, maybe a little bit of everything. So I found it a good exercise for me to kind of sit back and learn from how I designed these things and how the students performed on them, how I'm evaluating them, and how I'm delivering the content and measuring their performance. Again, it's a bit amount of work, so like I said, I don't think we expect you to do this. I mean, it's not part of the workshop or anything like that, but just an example of how you can actually use these things when you're in your class.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Ahmad. I thought it was really cool that Ahmad wanted to kind of look at those data around his students. Aaron pointed out in the chat that you wouldn't expect a perfect correlation because the students should improve from the time they do it in Hydrolearn to the time they take it in the test. And that's definitely true. One usefulness is if you're noticing students doing particularly poorly in a given learning objective in Hydrolearn, and you know you have a test coming up, you could always take time out of class to revisit that content or topic. Christina, I think, has made a point about using baseline assessments. And I don't know, I don't know if anyone wants to respond to Christina's question in the chat there, asking if anyone has given baseline assessments.
So baseline assessment is what? Is like before they even do the Hydrolearn activities altogether?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a pre-assessment.
I think we did some of that, like testing their knowledge is like a pre-knowledge and post-knowledge. Is that right? Yeah, I don't think we did that specifically, because some of the concepts that they learn in Hydrolearn was the first time they learned about it. So the pre-knowledge would have been, it does not exist and will show an immediate improvement. Right. Yeah, so I guess with the baseline assessment, we could measure progress over a limited time scale. That is true. And I think with designing the learning activities in the way we're trying to design it here, and the assessment, the rubrics and all that, gives actually the data that allows you to do this kind of experiment. Quite often I find myself doing it on the fly, and then I miss opportunities of doing that, because we were kind of building the plane, as we tried to fly it. So, but if we do it in a more organized way, all of us, and when you do it in your own class, you can certainly, have a control over, these kind of experiments and get them going with a good design from the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you, man. So I think the next person we're going to hear from is Jenny. She's got some technical tips for us.
Sure. So for our tech update, I can't remember specifically who brought this up to my attention, but they had a concern that their module may address different target audiences. So it would have content in there for undergraduates and also graduate students. And they were wondering if there was a way they could organize that material within one module. And I did find a way that we can do this within Hydrolearn. So I added a new unit to Hydrolearn 101. It's in section 3 under student experience, and I also hyperlinked it here in on slide 12 under tech update.
You're not seeing your screen. Did you want to show it?
Sure. Okay, so it is hyperlinked right here. And you can, and it was a pretty detailed process for this, so I just provide a broad overview and then links to where you can find more information about organizing your course based on student cohorts. So for those of you who may want to divide your module based on student characteristics, then you're going to want to go with a manual assignment of your cohorts. So basically, as students enroll, you manually assign them to either the undergraduate cohort or the graduate cohort, and then you can divide up the content within your module that will, suit their knowledge as they go along. So you can divide up like, problem sets or quizzes. You can also assign discussions to certain cohorts. And if you want more information about enabling this feature and assigning the cohorts, it's all for you right here in Hydrolearn 101. My other update was that the maintenance early this morning was a success, at least on my end. So if you are experiencing any more issues, please bring it up to your tech advisor. Otherwise, everything should be okay. That's it for the Jenny Bird update.
Jenny, and I'm sorry if I intercept here, but also yesterday in the call with some of my groups, there were some questions about student access to these modules and how they can administer them in the class. So it might be useful maybe for tomorrow if you have another tech update to share some information, unless it's in 101, maybe we can just show what it is, on how how do you share that with your students and how they can sign up or enroll or something like that, and how the instructor will be able to track maybe the students' work inside Hydrolearn if they choose to.
So sure, we have information on that in the 3rd section of Hydrolearn 101. Here we have in the student experience subsection, this is how you can enroll your students and their viewing options. Furthermore, we go into details about the configuration of settings and how it affects your students' viewing limitations. If you want to look at students' grades, we have here how to set up a grading scheme, and then here how to track their progress and grades as they progress through your module.
Any other questions for Jenny before we start talking about constructive alignment and learning activities?
So this is Tao talking. I have a question about the learning activity. So I noticed that a lot of existing modules use the discussion loop, even the Hydrolearn 101, but oftentimes the discussion is not graded. Is there any way that we can grade, students' reply or post, just to assess their participation or attendance?
That is a good question. The only way that I have tracked students' participation in a discussion board so far has been in Hydrolearn 101. And there is a broad overview page for every discussion board, and you can look in each one and then just see if the student participated, but you have to look in each discussion board. And there's not a direct way to maybe look at one student's progress page and be like, okay, they did these survey questions and participated in the discussion boards. So short answer, I don't know. And I will look into seeing if there's a way that we can track their participation in a discussion board in an easier and less time-consuming way.
Thank you, Jenny.
I would suspect that it's probably better to be done this way, because most of the time you will have to, it's not like a wrong or right answer. So you probably have to just take an overall look into how the students participated, or each student participate, and assume you want to give them like bonus points or something. I don't know if it can be part of the grade because it's not very quantitative, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if just 10 students, I have no problem to do that. Like if you have like 50 or 60 or more, it's almost impossible, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
From being an instructor in a course in Hydrolearn and also using LMSs to teach online through my university, I would say that the university LMSs, Moodle, Brightspace, and Blackboard, those are the three I've used at my different universities, are all better than Hydrolearn for tracking comments and discussion boards and assigning grades. And in the LMSs, you can create a rubric for your discussion boards to make it a little more quantifiable. So what I'm saying with my suggestion there is that I think it might be better to leave the discussion board within your own LMS rather than put it in the Hydrolearn. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Dave now. He's going to talk to us about constructive alignment.
Okay, so this will pick up well from where Emad left off. Where Emad left off. Constructive alignment is this idea that we've been harping on a little bit about making sure all of the parts of the module and really the whole learning experience for the students are aligned, that the learning objectives guide the instruction and the assessment follows that. So you might think of it as teaching to the test, which sometimes people think of as not necessarily always a good thing, but if you help the students learn what it is that you're going to examine them on, that is a good thing. It means you're assessing what it is you've taught and you're helping focus on what you really expect the students to learn. So Emad was actually looking at that quantitatively by seeing how well students did in the Hydrolearn assessment and then correlating that with how well they did in the similar sort of thing in the exam. And as Erin noted, it's good if they actually are all getting it right in the exam, but probably not all getting it right in the doing of the exercise because they were trying to learn it when they did it first, but then they had demonstrated that they'd got it with the exam, which is a good thing. So I'm gonna jump into some examples with the Beaubassin module in a bit, but our focus is really on the alignment between learning objectives and assessments, and just pointing attention that we're using the learning activities in Hydrolearn as Hydrolearn's way of doing assessments. You could also think of learning activities would also fit here under instruction, and I guess they sort of span both parts of this constructive alignment triangle. So we're going to go to the Beaubassin module and look at the learning activity under the detention basin design with HEC-HMS, side by side with the summary learning objectives, and sort of do a bit of examination on the fly as to how well these align. So I'm going to escape out of this, and if you guys have enough screens on your computer, you are welcome and encouraged to sort of be looking at the Hydrolearn module as well as you're following along with me. So let's move this out of the way. So here we have, so here I'm in Hydrolearn and the Beaubassin module, which has a number of sections. And the one we're going to focus on is right towards the end, where there's modeling with HEC-HMS and the detention basin design part, or we should really expand the introduction part to get the learning objectives. So let me, and I'm trying to get my screen organized here. If I open this in a new window, I can have the learning objectives on one side and the module on the other side. We sort of go through and look for the appropriate constructive alignment. So at the end of the section, the following is expected. The students will be able to navigate HHMS software for future design applications. They'll be able to use HHMS to construct a unit hydrograph. They should be able to construct a reservoir outflow hydrograph and design a flood protection system. And then they'll be able to assess the impact of different design parameters on the reservoir. And use their design options. They'll be able to analyze the relationships, trade-offs. So those are pretty high-level cognitive activities. Some of them are a little bit plug and chug in terms of actually doing the using the software. So let's go and see how well we think. And this is, I'd like to have sort of feedback and discussion. So feel free to put comments in text, or if you think, in chat, and if you think people want to, if you want to pipe up and say something, feel free to just interrupt. So let's go into, okay, I guess I didn't want to go to, well, the background on the, that just explains what's going on there, various types of stormwater management systems, and the general concepts involved. There's a check your understanding part, which is for students to check in on whether they know the difference between some of these things, the stormwater detain and detention basin during and after storms, the difference between one of these things. And then we go to the actual learning activity. So the learning activity says it will use HHMS and the storm hydrograph developed earlier to analyze the trade-off. So we're starting to see some alignment here because they will be using HHMS. And we were talking about students should be able to navigate through things, and results from HHMS testing and outlet size and so on. And here we get into the rubric, which gives the I guess learning objective 1 is this one about navigating HMS software, and presumably they wouldn't have been able to produce a results table if they couldn't navigate the software. So there's some sort of alignment there. The next one is they've got a HHMS hydrograph and summary table. Again, you wouldn't be able to present that if you were unable to navigate the software. Multiple designs. So that would be hopefully aligning with using HHMS. The student will be able to design a flood protection system, including the design of a detention basin. And I guess it says here objective 4. It's probably actually both objectives 4 and perhaps objective 5, because objective 5 is the impact of various design parameters. So really the multiple designs comes through objective 5. So I think some of these things are not necessarily perfectly designed, even for this perhaps somewhat polished module, and not necessarily a large problem, but some of the things that we'll pick up with the the sort of Hydrolearn assessment tool that you'll be working with later. Then we've got a part of the rubric is the procedure and documentation. So for the students to document what they actually did. And it says here it meets learning objective 4, which is they are able to design the flood protection system. Really here, the procedure and documentation is the students describing what they did, which probably cuts across many of the learning objectives here, because they should probably actually be describing what they did with the reservoir outflow hydrograph, how they sized the detention basin and the outlet orifice, and so on. Then practicality. So applying some level of judgment as to whether the sizes they come up are actually practical, and that fits into probably objectives 4, 5, and 6. But I don't think a learning objective actually really addresses whether the students should be, well, how practical is the answer? So that this, and we might have to go into the activity and see what was actually done with the concept of practicality, but maybe the learning objective could have been expanded to think about the degree to which the designs that you come up are actually practical. Now that's obviously a judgment call. It's a judgment call at many levels. A judgment call as to how much detail you want to go in a learning activity for students, but also a judgment call in terms of the engineering of it. If it's protecting lives and property, and it's really important property and a lot of people, you probably would be willing to spend a huge amount of money. But if it's only protecting against inconvenience, then maybe it's less. So you can get into many of those things which actually align reasonably well with some of these ABET outcomes that are mentioned here. So I will pause there before going down and looking at what this activity actually is, and see if there's any reactions to the monologue so far. I don't want it to be a monologue. Any thoughts? Emma, I'll put you on the spot, since some of this was your work.
Sure.
So comments.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to what I was just saying, that it's really an iterative process. I already see a room for improvement here. So I think this is a good example, because it shows, it's by no means a perfect example, or this is how it should be done. So yeah, I mean, it's I can see couple either in the learning objectives, like you said, David, we can refine those. We can, if we believe that the activities can deliver more than what the learning objectives are saying, or vice versa, then we need to revise.
Okay.
Like I said, unfortunately, and that's part of the research, right? When we prepared this, at least for this module, I prepared them almost like an isolation of each other, and that was not a good practice, right? But when I started using them, then I had to go back and actually follow that cycle, even though I was not 100% aware of it, and then that's when things start to improve a little bit, and also it improves in terms of the students' experience. Actually, the first 1 or 2 sections in Hydrolearn, the students were frustrated because they didn't see that, okay, I did this, and now you're grading me, and the grade is too harsh or not consistent with what I was supposed to do. So, yeah.
Okay. So what about others? I know that there's people here who who've been involved with, for example, ASCE and teaching things for engineers. So any thoughts related to this that might come from those activities?
Good.
Yeah, so my department is putting together our draft ABET binders since we're a new department. And I was just gonna comment on like the ABET outcomes. You know, each assignment has to map to a separate outcome, or you'd have to break up your assignment and match each question to an ABET outcome. So just for like the, you know, value add for instructors and having them map to ABET outcomes, we would have to either map each assignment to one outcome or break up an assignment and match each specific part. So it'd almost be like another column.
So you're suggesting adding a column in the rubric that could actually just identify an aligned ABET outcome. Is there a limitation that it has to be only one ABET outcome, or can there be more than one?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm suggesting that. That's like the ABET process for anyone who is trying to use this to help develop their virtual binders. Yeah, you would have to either map the entire assignment to one outcome, or you'd have to break it up and have, you know, like we have here for the learning objectives. So I don't know if that's a goal of Hydrolearn, but what we're expected to do for ABET.
Well, I mean, I think a goal of Hydrolearn is broadly to promote good practices in engineering education, and clearly helping with ABET is part of that, because ABET has ultimately a similar goal of requiring departments to go through the continuous improvement process, evaluating the effectiveness of reaching the ABET outcomes and then rectifying any problems. So it's good to be continually thinking about that. And I guess we always get reminded that ABET is not just a once every 6 year type of thing.
Yeah.
It has to be a continuous process that we should be paying attention to all the time.
I guess something that this exercise made me think of, or an appreciation I've gained from this rubric, is how many points are dedicated to the thoughtfulness or the higher order learning objectives. I mean, I think in my classes or with traditional teaching, it seemed like a student could get an okay grade, I mean, certainly a C, without really understanding those higher order issues, like assessing the practicality for fully, or you know, going through these steps or these written components. I like how there's a substantial amount of points devoted to that, such that students can't just go through the motions and complete the application part and get most of the credit. It seems like this really is kind of backing that up. We want you to get the full way there. I like it.
Right. So I think that's a good thing. And I think we all want our students to get to the high level cognitive activities, and sometimes they don't, and hopefully this helps a little bit. Any other comments from anybody else?
Dave, there's a bunch of comments that have come in the chat box.
Oh, okay. My chat seems to be being slow. Could you instead map the, okay, there we go.
I think David Chandler is asking about the expected time to complete.
What's the expected time to complete the module? 75 years. It should be stated at the beginning. Emma, do you know it offhand?
David, are you asking about this particular module or the one that you are developing? Because this particular module, I think, yes, it is stated at the beginning, and all the modules in Hydrolearn vary. If you are asking about the modules that you guys are developing, I think Dan, if he's on the phone, he provided some guidance on that early on in the week. He was saying that, you know, we are looking for modules that will take students between, correct me, Melissa and Dave if I'm wrong, between 15 to 20 hours to complete, right, of student work. Like on average, you would expect the student to finish your module. That would take them about 15 to 20 working hours. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I think there's a question from Sam.
So, yeah, so it was as to whether the guidelines for multiple designs were effectively alternatives that were somewhat listed by the module, or whether there was truly a level of open-endedness. And I think firstly, I think that's a really important question for you to think about in your modules, in terms of where you expect the students to get. And if you're getting up to the create level in Bloom's taxonomy, you probably have a level of open-endedness that you want. I would have to probably defer to Emad with where we landed with this one specifically, but yeah. I think it probably was somewhat limited to where you could choose specific outlet pipe sizes, and you could maybe then evaluate different tension basin designs, but you didn't really have the freedom to go off and think of an alternative creative solution that might have been, say, preventing the runoff increases in the first place by best management practices in the watershed or something like that. So right. Yeah, so it may have not as been as open-ended as sometimes you want, but I mean, I think that's an important question for you guys to think about.
Right. Yeah, and I often struggle with that too, because if you make it too open-ended and you know, some of the students, you know, again, this is primarily for undergrad, and you know, sometimes they get lost and they don't really know what to do, and okay, what does that really mean? What are multiple designs that I'm looking for here? And may come back with something that's very naive and very simple. So we ended up providing some almost like ideas, you know, like David said, try different pipe designs, try different locations of the reservoir, maybe different dimensions, and discuss the implications. So you have to give them some tips on what to look for. I guess, you know, maybe when you finish this in your class, maybe you can give them another really, really open-ended one where you can say, okay, go and think of a completely different design that will, you know, look very much different from that. But at least by going through this activity, they would have learned and understood the process itself that prepares them for a truly open-ended, fully open-ended activity.
I'm going to jump in there. I heard this conversation in a lot of groups yesterday, and I think maybe I didn't communicate super clearly what an authentic task is. It doesn't have to be exactly this same creative process that an engineer might spend 40 hours a week for 6 months on a team engaging in, but that we put constraints on it so the students are still making decisions and choices and using the models or the tools to make decisions, but within within constraints that we put on them. If Gianna's here, she came up with a great authentic context that inherently put those constraints on students yesterday. Gianna, are you here? Would you like to share that? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think back what we were talking about. I think, yeah, we were having a little trouble deciding, you know, whether or not we should constrain it. And I was thinking that instead of approaching, and we hadn't really fully decided that we would have the students do a design yet, and we were questioning that. So I was thinking that instead we could look at the, I guess the city or whatever is having a problem with an existing design somewhere, and they would have to then be constrained to how the system is already designed, and it's already, say, experiencing some flooding problems, and then go back and the student would have to come up with examples of how they might alleviate it, or how they might have designed it differently and just make those changes, part of their discussion.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just looking at some of these other questions. Christina asked, can we add a column for each or any standard outcome, ABET, core curriculum, journal publications? I think certainly as a designer of a module, you can put columns in that you think are meaningful to you. So the ABET column is one that I expect might be fairly common. Journal publications is an interesting suggestion, probably more appropriate at a graduate level where you might maybe be expecting students to, I guess, Christina, are you thinking of students writing a journal publication as part of this, or is this reading of papers? Because the timing of getting a paper written in the length of a course would be kind of tough.
Sure. I think what I was thinking is for my specific question was about how do I build a learning objective that aligns with something that makes getting the publication completed easier. So you'd want to, what would make a student want to come to this class versus another class? Could be, they are prepared to meet a journal expectation that a faculty member might not know about yet, or has emerged since the faculty member learned how to, what is a fair standard, right? If your students are trained to put something on HydroShare in a timely way that doesn't take up a year of their life, then you can learn how to do it quickly in this class as part of your learning. Then you might be able to streamline how you publish your papers, I guess. How can we build a class with learning objectives that make it easier for students to learn the skills they need to be able to efficiently publish?
All right. So, I mean, I think that's certainly, yeah.
It's just sometimes the content in engineering that is, sometimes the content and structure of the class is disconnected from the actual products that need to be generated. And if it's communicating clearly or publishing data or sharing your code or explaining how you did it, it could be done in an engineering report, which we're more familiar with, but you can also communicate through other types of publications.
Yeah, I guess I'm flipping back to the slides here. We don't want the content to be disconnected from what we want students to get. So that's the whole concept of constructive alignment. So the degree to which preparing students to be able to write papers, to be able to develop publishable content probably could be stated as a learning objective. And then you would have the instruction that says what the expectations are and how students should actually go about that. And those would be some of the things that you're mentioning. And then in the assessment, you would, which would be that sort of outcomes of your learning activity, you would look for the students to have done this in whatever way that is feasible within the sort of time constraints and content constraints of the course. Yeah, but interesting set of ideas. So could you instead map the learning objectives to ABET objectives? I think certainly, and I mean at some level, one could adopt ABET outcomes. I think the worst is the official word ABET outcomes rather than ABET.
Right. Yeah, and we do have that actually, David. And I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have that when you build the learning objectives, your own learning objectives for this module. We have it in the template where you can basically link it to an ABET objective, ABET outcome. It's probably not here in the rubrics because, well, you can add it in the rubrics, but we encourage when you build the learning objectives early on to actually link it to an ABET outcome if it applies to you. You know, some of us are not in engineering, for example, you know, so that may not apply to them, but you can do it very early on and when you build the learning objectives.
Right, okay. Then Courtney was just saying that Freddie had a good idea there, which is great. So I guess, David Chandler, you had something about as a legal procedure. I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure what you would be thinking of with a legal procedure there.
Okay, so starting several years ago, then Don Siegel would run a course basically leading up to a mock trial for determining whether or not some hydrologic activity was legal or not. So it's usually like a pollution case, right? And so then that forces the students to make their case and defend the procedures that they've used to come to their conclusions. And typically they have a couple of sides arguing the point. And so this has been pretty popular, and I think it's a good way to finish what might be otherwise a sort of open-ended an open-ended comparison to a couple of different potential outcomes of an analysis.
Right, so yeah, interesting. So I think here you would then have probably established as learning objectives students learning to frame their work in a defendable and court type perspective, and then some instruction guidance that relates to that, and then the activity and the assessment of it is just as you sort of outlined it, the mock trial maybe. You should tell Don Siegel to put some of his content in Hydrolearn.
He's retired now.
Well, so a wonderful thing to do in retirement, to leave a legacy for others to to have access to, because otherwise his knowledge walks out the door as he heads off into retirement.
Well, his legacy was Laura Lautz, and she went to NSF.
Okay. Anyway, so the first criteria seems to be testing more than just an ability to run HEC-HMS. Students will not fully get credit if they don't convert units correctly or create a clear table. Good point. Many of us sort of assume that, okay, students just better do the unit conversions correctly. But sometimes having it explicitly stated as a learning objective and an explicit part of the rubric might be of value, especially because then you have a legitimate way to dock points from students who don't do the unit conversions correctly, which is a perennial problem. So to echo, that is a popular course, students love it. I'm not sure exactly which of the comments above. Tawin, were you referring to Don Siegel's course or some other course?
Yeah, Siegel's course.
Okay, so you did that, did you?
Actually, I'm joining the same department, so I met him and the students in that department. So I know that course was very popular and the students love it.
Okay. All right, any other, I'm not seeing anything more in chat. Christina thinks a mock trial would be a whole lot of fun. As long as it's a mock trial, I'm perfectly happy with it being fun. A real trial I'd find really scary. There were a couple of things in the slides, but I should probably wrap it up. I don't know how much more time you want me to take, Melissa. But this slide, which is after the last one I presented, really just lists some of the things to examine in really checking for yourself that there is constructive alignment. Many of these things we've discussed here. And then this is going to be an activity that you guys should do And I guess, when did we want people to do this, Melissa?
So we could give them a few minutes to get started on it now and kind of think it through so that we can discuss any challenges that there might be before partner work time starts.
So do you want to break into groups for this, or do you just want to do it en masse?
Yeah, I thought that it would be useful to break into their partner groups. Do you want me to go over what?
Sure. So we're just going to break into partner groups where you take a look at what's in slide 17. Pick one of your learning activities. Look at the learning objectives that go with it, which are being developed. Examine the activity and maybe revise the learning activity objectives and rubric as needed to improve constructive alignment. And keep in mind that learning objectives should be present in that learning activity. And is the activity assessing only those learning objectives, or is it assessing something else? And if it's assessing something else, you might think about whether that something else should be called out as a learning objective. And does the rubric capture the components? So hopefully that's enough guidance for you to dissect your learning activity and assessments.
All right, any questions about that activity before we jump into the breakout rooms?
So how long are we going to be there?
Yeah, so we'll be in the breakout rooms about 10 minutes. The objective is not necessarily to finish looking at constructive alignment, but to get started so that if you have any questions or anything stands out to you, we can discuss that back when we get to the whole group. So you'll have time during partner work time to finish looking at this and continue working on more learning activities. Does that sound good? I know we don't always love the 10-minute breakouts, but. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. If you have any questions, you're welcome to stay here before you jump into your rooms. All right, so I wanted to give you time in your small groups to get started with this conversation because I wanted to open it up for a broader conversation about what did focusing specifically on constructive alignment and that discussion for just 10 minutes, what ideas do you have from that moving forward that'll help you with your work time today? So go ahead and think about that. What ideas did you gain from that short conversation that will focus your conversation moving forward?
Melissa,
yes.
Before we actually go there, I really like Dave's example, and I'm pretty sure that you may, or can we get a list of the different discussed different so of the specific, the second column, the specific activities that they were mentioning. So for instance, multiple criteria or some of those specific topics, so we can use them as a template. Yeah, could you keep going up?
Do you mean in the detention basin?
Yeah, but in general, so he had, for instance, a proficiency on the tool, proficiency of the software, then multiple designs, then practicality. A lot of those, I think, can be, and I'm pretty sure that in here you may have more other examples of other modules, that it might be good to keep an eye on it so we can see where we can fit some of it more generically. So we're not reinventing the wheel. So we have a database that we can pick it up. Here's an idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We can work to make one Google Doc where you could look for rubric ideas. Great suggestion, Sam. Jenny, I'm going to hand that task off to you. Put that on your to-do list. All right, so in the chat box, anything that kind of came out of that discussion that will help you focus and moving forward with your partner work time?
I see a comment from Joshua in the chat box.
Yeah, I think Joshua's comment is really important, that sometimes this activity can highlight the need for more specific details in your learning activities. One thing that I do when I review modules is I go through the activities doing the steps one at a time, because obviously I'm not familiar with the softwares and programs that you ask your students to use. And so if I struggle to navigate them, then feedback you might get from me is that you need more specific directions, because students may have that same difficulty, whereas things are so familiar to you and you understand what things mean. I like Willie's point too about bringing in broader program learning outcomes such as professionalism and communication. I really like Adam's praise of his partner. Thanks, Adam, for praising Kieran's alignment. David has noticed the iterative nature of this process. It is very iterative. One thing that I was having a conversation in one of the afternoon groups yesterday about assessing writing in the rubrics. So if you're planning on assessing students' writing, which I would argue is critical for engineers to be able to write, and a lot of the work I've read says that that's a limitation of new graduates from all disciplines. And so I added some writing rubrics in here. Now these are rubrics for grades 3 through 12. However, arguably where a 12th grader is in writing and where a college sophomore is are probably not too far off. This is a 15-page writing rubric. So if you have used writing rubrics in the past, you might, you probably didn't use a 15-pager. And so I think a benefit of this is that each of the criteria is very specific, and you could pull specific criteria that would apply to your learning assessment or learning activity. So for instance, reasoning or thinking might be an important component to have in writing. And the top of the rubric here says conveys fresh, useful information using higher order thinking skills and convincing reasoning to provide unique insights into complex ideas. So I added these rubrics here. They're freely available on the web. And so if any of these ideas help you, this is based on the 6+1 traits of writing. The 6+1 traits, which is really just 7, I don't know why they don't call it 7, are ideas, organization, voice, word choice, sentence fluency, conventions being spelling, punctuation, all that, and then presentation. So I added these here to the folder in case maybe they're helpful for those who might want to add writing. But if you do add writing, then an important consideration is how are you supporting students in their writing and not just grading it. Let me see, I'm probably missing things in the chat. David Tarbutton making jokes. Yes, Freddie, I was thinking of you and Adam when I put that in there. And yes, college sophomores also can be rather low on the writing as well. I was teaching 3rd grade and then I was teaching seniors in undergrad, and the similarities in their writing were rather disappointing. So the last thing I want to talk to you about before we break for our partner work time today is the Hydrolearn module feedback tool. And so what this is essentially we sat down in maybe April or May and kind of talked out what are the kind of components that we're really looking for as we review modules. And so we put those into a Hydrolearn module feedback tool. But we did not give this to you on day 1 because the tool itself is like 5 or 6 pages long, and we felt like that might seem a little intimidating. But at this point, you have seen almost all the ideas already presented through our slides. So I'd like to give you a minute to take a look at it. It's in the Fellows folder. It's called the HL Module Feedback Tool. And a note I want to make before you begin to look at it is that we have not begun talking about engaging in accessible instruction, and we're going to start talking about that tomorrow. So you'll notice it's divided into sections. Okay. So this is actually the wrong version of it. It's very similar to the right version, and I will find the right version to make sure it gets up there for you in a minute. But in the engaging and instructable engaging and accessible instruction section is here. You'll notice that there are multiple copies of it because we would look at your instruction in section 1, in section 2, in section 3, however many sections you have of your module, that's where we'll look for it. So you'll notice the same thing is repeated over and over. If you don't have 5 sections, we're not going to make a comment on section 5, right? So what I'd like you to do right now is to think about what do you notice about this feedback tool. And as you notice things, go ahead and put them in the chat. And while we're doing this, I will look for the version that I revised last week for you. All right, so I'm actually going to put the link on that HL module feedback tool slide from today, and I'm going to, I also put it in our shared folder. It's called Copy of Module Feedback Tool, and I'm going to delete the other one from the shared folder. So if you're looking at it now, it's called the Copy of. So what are things that you notice, or what are questions that you have about this tool? Yeah, so I see Hillary and Will, you're on the same page. This is essentially kind of a rubric or a checklist for you all. Joanne notices that figures and pictures are valued. That is something that we'll talk about tomorrow. The importance of using multiple media and multiple modes to present content to students. glad Alex sees the connection to what we've been talking about over the past few meetings. We've tried to use the same language and even sometimes taken snips of this module feedback tool so that it wouldn't feel surprising to you. All right, so it seems like I don't see any questions in the chat about that so far. So then I'm going to, so now let's talk about what we hope you will accomplish in the next 4.5 hours. We're hoping that you will revise learning activities as needed to ensure constructive alignment, so continuing the conversation you were just having in your small groups. To also revise your learning activities as needed based on this module feedback tool. And you'll notice that the learning, I'm asking you to skip the engaging and accessible instruction for now, because we'll start talking about that tomorrow. But there are sections here looking at clear and engaging learning activities. So we'll use this tool to start thinking about revising your learning activities as needed. And I know that I have a lot of Google Docs that have been emailed to me that I need to look at, and that is my priority first thing. I'm sure that the other content and education guides are further ahead than I am, but I know that that is my priority, to give feedback on what you've sent. And please, as you continue to accomplish things or come to conclusions or revisions, please continue to send those on and ask for feedback. So we're going to work until 5, 4, 3, or 2, depending on your time zone. Are there any questions before we go into our partner work groups and get working?
Marissa, there's a question from Hugo, or at least a comment. Okay.
I think David answered that. Is that clearly answered to you, Hugo, or would you like to voice your question aloud?
No, I think it's good. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, well then I will go ahead and put you in your breakout rooms, and as always, I'll hang out here for a little bit. So if you have questions, you can feel free to hang on a second. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I see some people look like they're starting to fade. Some people, maybe people who live in New Zealand, look really refreshed and ready to go. So hopefully this was a productive afternoon for you. I've seen some teams starting to divide and conquer, coming back together to work on learning activities, but maybe each working on their own or starting to develop rubrics, kind of getting in the swing of things. I think that's great. We're happy to have you start dividing and conquering if you feel like you're ready for that. And if you're as long as you're checking in with each other and making sure everything kind of still matches your overall goals. So taking a look at today's slides. Jenny has got a couple of messages for us, and then we're going to move into our content rooms. Is Jenny here with us? Jenny is not here. She lost electricity in a storm. So I will go ahead and share this message. We have had some questions from you all and some discussions in small groups and whole groups around grading. And so we met as PIs and kind of talked about this. So at this point, we suggest that you not really think about grading in Hydrolearn, although there is to some extent that capacity, because different people will be using it and adopting it. We'd like Hydrolearn to stand alone. And then for you to, as you think about things like discussion boards or where students would turn in assignments, not to note that in Hydrolearn, but as you're planning for your own fall semester, those would be things that we think would be best integrated into your own learning management system, whether that's Moodle or Canvas or Blackboard or Brightspace or whatever you're using. We also think that'll facilitate grading and make sure that there's no privacy issues as the Hydrolearn content is backed up on the University of Louisiana server. Imad or Dave, anything you want to add? Or Dan, anything you want to add in there? Or Belize?
No, I think this is good. Yeah, I usually send my students to Hydrolearn, work on this section or work on this activity or work on this module. I announce that through my own LMS, and I tell them complete that section, and once you finish it, submit the requirements which are delineated on Hydrolearn, submit them through the LMS. This way it's clean, and I don't have to chase between the two different sources. And yes, that's how I do it. I think it's a safer and cleaner way.
So I might just add that I guess I think the intent here was to just have focus be on the content rather than trying to fine tune the rubric scores too much. So that was probably what got us into some of this discussion. And Jenny actually asked me to comment on the slide, and I didn't get a chance to. So I've just edited a little bit of that in there, but too late because you've already.
Sorry. Too slow.
Well, yeah, no, it's only once you saw it that I realized that I was supposed to have edited it.
All right, so the next slide is on how to enroll students in your module, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow morning because Jenny's electricity is out because of a rainstorm. So, unless Ren wants to present this to us, but I'm not sure if you want me to put you on the spot like that. All right, we'll have Jenny do it tomorrow. So we're going to go into our content groups in just a moment here. In your content groups, you're going to take turns, each partnership sharing one learning activity that you revised today, highlighting or talking about the revisions that you made either to further the constructive alignment, or you might highlight maybe a tension or a discussion your group was having that you could bring to the bigger group for discussion. For instance, I heard some groups discussing how specific to make their rubrics and the kind of details to include at the different levels of their rubric. That might be something that the whole group could benefit from discussing. Here are some things to consider when you're giving one another feedback. If you think that these sound familiar, it is because they come directly from the Hydrolearn module feedback tool, so they should look very familiar to you. Any questions about that as I move you into your bigger groups, your content groups? All right, well then I will open the rooms, and some of you might get magically swept around if I put you in the wrong room to start out with. So thanks for your patience there. And all right, the rooms are open.